All right, listeners, ready for this today? We're going deep on the collapse of Napoleon's empire. A whole empire.
Wow.
You guys sent in a ton of excerpts all about the period after that crazy Russian campaign of his,
Ah, yes.
the beginning of the end.
Right.
So we're going to break it all down, like why 1812 was such a turning point, how all of Napoleon's enemies finally decided to team up against him, and what started going wrong back home for him in France.
Well, you see, the thing about the Russian campaign is that it wasn't just some military loss for Napoleon. It really messed with his image across all of Europe.
So, like, more than just some battles going wrong.
Oh, yeah, way more. Up to that
Yeah.
point, you got to remember, everyone thought Napoleon was unbeatable.
Right.
He'd taken over most of Europe.
Like it was nothing.
It's crazy. But then that retreat from Moscow, there was like a crack in his armor. It
Yeah.
showed everyone, even his own soldiers, that he wasn't some, god of war after all.
Yeah, that makes you wonder if maybe everyone thinking he was invincible was part of why he was so successful for so long.
Oh, absolutely. I think that was a huge part of it. And once everyone saw that he could be beaten well,
Yeah.
they weren't so scared of him anymore. All of a sudden, ganging up on him didn't seem like such a crazy idea.
Yeah.
And that's how we get the Sixth Coalition. This totally random group of countries that normally hated each other.
Yeah, and we aren't talking about small countries here either. This is Russia, Prussia, Austria, Great Britain, Sweden.
Yeah,
It's like the whole continent decided to take him down.
pretty much. And they all had their own reasons for joining the party. Some, like Russia, they wanted revenge after Napoleon invaded them.
Obviously.
And you have others like Prussia who were like, okay, this is our chance to finally get out from under Napoleon's thumb.
Yeah, they'd been forced into all these alliances they didn't even want for years.
Exactly. So, not exactly a team built on friendship and trust.
Haha, more like they all had a common enemy and were looking out for number one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But somehow, even with all that drama, they managed to put their differences aside long enough to actually take Napoleon down.
Yeah, and we can't forget about Great Britain here. They were the ones funding the whole thing, right?
Oh, for sure. Plus, they had that navy that no one could touch.
Yeah, no one could control the seas like they could.
Nope. So basically, British money and ships kept the coalition going. They made sure everyone had enough supplies and basically choked off all of France's trade.
So Napoleon's facing this massive team. His reputation's shot, but he's not going to just give up, is he?
No way.
So he scrambles to rebuild the French army. What's that like for the average person in France?
It's rough, man. Imagine you've lost like hundreds of thousands of soldiers in Russia. Your country's broke.
Right.
And now the government's asking you to send your sons, your husbands, maybe even yourself, to go fight another war.
I can see how that would start to make people resentful. I mean, it's one thing to fight for glory and all that,
Yeah.
but when you're losing so many people and you can't even put food on the table, those big ideas start to lose their shine.
Exactly. And that's what started happening in France. The never-ending wars, the fact that they had no money, it just wore everyone down. People started to question if Napoleon was even a good leader anymore.
Yeah.
They started talking about wanting peace. Even the people close to Napoleon, they were getting nervous.
So things are starting to fall apart for him, both on the battlefield and back home.
Right.
So what does he do? Does he just throw in the towel?
Napoleon.
Give up?
He decides to launch a whole new campaign in Germany in 1813.
Yeah.
He's trying to regain control of Central Europe. It's a
Wow.
huge gamble. He's basically throwing everything he has left at this,
Yeah.
trying to save his empire.
Yeah.
And it all leads to this series of battles. They show how brilliant he was at tactics,
Yeah.
but they also show how weak he was becoming,
All right. Well, let's hear about these battles because, we love a good war story.
of course.
So first up, we have the Battle of Lutzen, May 1813.
Okay, so Lutzen's interesting because on paper, Napoleon won. He outsmarted the coalition forces, inflicted more casualties.
Okay.
But here's the thing, he didn't crush them. They fell back. They regrouped. They kept fighting.
So it's like he won the battle, but not the war.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And then a few weeks later, same thing happens at the Battle of Botzen. Another win for Napoleon. But again, he doesn't really take advantage of it. He can't break their spirit.
Mm.
He's up against a whole different kind of enemy now. One that's learned from their mistakes, and they just won't quit.
And meanwhile, back in France, things are getting worse and worse.
Oh, yeah. The economy's in the tank. People are openly disagreeing with the government now.
Wow.
Even Napoleon's biggest supporters are starting to have doubts.
Okay, so we've got Napoleon barely holding on to power, this coalition that just won't give up, and a France that is so over war.
Yeah.
Sounds like everything's about to explode.
Oh, it is, and it's going to be a huge explosion.
Yeah.
The Battle of Dresden in August 1813. That's another one for the history books.
Oh, yeah.
Over 300,000 soldiers fighting Napoleon once again, showing off his crazy good tactics.
Uh-huh.
There's always a but, isn't there?
You know what?
Even though Napoleon wins at Dresden, it costs him a lot. His army is exhausted, he's running out of supplies, he's winning battles, but he's losing the war. And what happens next is going to change the course of history.
Okay, you've got me on the edge of my seat. What happens next?
Well, in October 1813, we had the Battle of Leipzig. They call it the Battle of Nations. For a reason, over 600,000 troops.
Oh my gosh.
It's the biggest battle in Europe until World War I.
That's insane. The scale of that is just mind-blowing.
Yeah, and it was a total turning point. The coalition, with all their combined forces, they just overwhelmed Napoleon. It's a massive defeat, and he loses control of Germany. His empire, it's starting to crumble.
So the tease is finally turned.
It has. The question is, how long can Napoleon hold out? How long before it all comes crashing down?
Well, that's the story for part 2.
Uh-huh.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more on the downfall of Napoleon. Okay, so last time we were talking about how Napoleon just got crushed at Leipzig. His enemies are closing in. He's losing his grip on power. And then in 1814, something crazy happens.
Yeah, for the first time in, like, forever, enemy armies invade France.
Wow, that must have been a huge shock for the French people. I mean, for years, Napoleon had been the one doing the invading, taking over other countries.
Right.
And now the war's happening to them.
It totally changed the way people thought about Napoleon.
Yeah.
I mean, at first, everyone was excited about his conquests.
Yeah.
But then people got tired of the fighting. The economy was a mess.
Yeah.
And now there are enemy soldiers on French soil. It was a real wake-up call.
So what does Napoleon do? Does he just freak out?
Nah, Napoleon doesn't give up that easily. He gets what's left of his army together and pulls off some amazing defensive moves.
Really?
Oh, yeah. You see those flashes of brilliance again in battles like Champaubert and Montereau. He really did a number on the coalition forces.
So he's not going down without a fight?
Nope. But these are like small victories, you know, not big picture stuff. He's buying time, but the coalition has way more soldiers, better weapons,
Right.
and they're learning how to beat him. They're adapting to his tactics.
It's kind of sad, isn't it? This brilliant military leader who's now totally outmatched. It's like watching a trapped lion fighting like crazy, but knowing it can't win.
That's a great analogy. And that's what Napoleon's last stand was like. He fought with everything he had.
Yeah.
But in March of 1814, Paris falls.
The heart of his empire, captured by his enemies, that must have been devastating, not just for Napoleon, but for all of France.
It was a huge symbolic defeat. And for Napoleon, it was the end. He gives up the throne on April 6th, 1814.
Wow. So the emperor is dethroned? What do they do with him? Do they just execute him?
No, they decide to exile him to Elba, this tiny little island off the coast of Italy.
Elba.
Yeah. And here's the crazy part. They let him keep the title of emperor, even though he's in exile.
Wait, they let him keep his title? That seems kind of dumb.
Well, they didn't want to make him a martyr.
Yeah.
You know, someone people would rally around. Giving him the title was a way to kind of appease him, make his exile a little easier to swallow.
But it also probably made it easier for him to come back.
It's exactly.
Yeah.
Having that title, that authority, it meant that Napoleon was still a player in European politics, even stuck on an island. And as he watched everything unfold, he saw an opportunity.
Okay, I'm hooked. What opportunity?
So the coalition powers weren't exactly getting along after Napoleon was gone.
Shocker.
There was a lot of tension and rivalry.
Yeah.
And back in France, the new king from the Bourbon family was super unpopular.
So the people who replaced Napoleon weren't doing a very good job.
Not at all. They were seen as out of touch.
Right.
More interested in going back to the old ways than actually helping people. And remember, Napoleon was a master of propaganda.
Oh, yeah.
Even though he lost, he still knew how to make himself look like the hero, the savior of France.
So he sees all this chaos, this discontent, and thinks, I can use this.
Exactly. In March 1815, he escapes from Elba with a few loyal followers and sets sail for France.
What?
It's crazy. What happens next is like something out of a movie.
I'm on the edge of my seat.
As Napoleon is marching toward Paris, the troops that were sent to arrest him end up joining him. It's amazing. People flocked to him.
Yeah.
They were inspired by his charisma and the promise of glory.
So the exiled emperor returns to reclaim his throne. What did the rest of Europe think about that?
They were furious. They couldn't believe it. All the countries that had just defeated Napoleon a year earlier, they put their differences aside again and formed a new coalition, the Seventh Coalition.
So round 2. It's Napoleon versus pretty much the entire world. But this time his army is much smaller. France is exhausted from all the fighting.
Yeah.
How could he possibly win?
That's the big question. And that's what makes this period so interesting. Napoleon, against all odds, decides to fight one last campaign. He's trying to defy fate. But as we'll see, history had other plans.
All right, I cannot wait to hear what happens. Let's dive into the final chapter of Napoleon's epic story in part 3. All right, so we're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive on Napoleon. He's escaped from exile, marched back into Paris, and now he's up against the Seventh Coalition. Pretty much all of Europe wants to take him down. So talk about pressure. What does he do next? Does he try to make peace, or is it time for another war?
Well, at this point, Napoleon knew that talking wasn't going to get him anywhere. The coalition was done with him. They wanted him gone for good. So his only option was to attack first and attack hard. Try to break them before they could all team up.
So it's another gamble, but what else can he do? What's the plan this time?
He decides to go after the British and Prussian armies. They were in what's now Belgium. He figured if he could take them out quickly, it might cause some problems for the coalition. Sow some discord,
Right.
give them some breathing room.
So this is where Waterloo happens, right? The big one. June 1815, the final showdown.
Exactly. And it's a battle that people still talk about today. Two huge armies fighting on a muddy field in Belgium. The fate of Europe is at stake.
Hmm.
And at the center of it all is Napoleon. This guy who's beaten the odds so many times.
Yeah, you can picture those old paintings of the battle. The smoke, the cannons, the soldiers charging. It must have been terrifying to be there.
It was brutal. But for Napoleon, it was a desperate move that failed. Despite some early wins, his army is just overwhelmed by the British and the Prussians.
And this time there's no coming back.
Nope. Waterloo was the end of Napoleon's rule. He steps down again. And this time, there's no comfy exile on a little island. They send him to St. Helena, this super remote island in the middle of the South Atlantic. They wanted to make sure he couldn't escape.
So the emperor ends up a prisoner, thousands of miles from France. What a fall from grace. But, it's not just about the battles and the politics. There's a bigger question here. What's Napoleon's legacy? Was he a good guy, a bad guy, or somewhere in between?
That's the question, isn't it? Historians have been arguing about that for ages, and there's no easy answer. He was a complicated guy, full of contradictions.
For sure.
I mean, on the one hand, he was a military genius. He changed the way wars were fought. He came up with new tactics, reorganized armies, and his soldiers were incredibly loyal to him.
But on the other hand,
he was also a dictator. He started tons of wars, killed millions of people just to get what he wanted. And he didn't tolerate anyone who disagreed with him.
so it's like he represents the good and the bad of the French Revolution.
Yeah, exactly. The ideas of freedom and equality,
Hmm.
but also the potential for violence and tyranny.
He came to power because of the revolution. He promised to spread those ideas across Europe. And in some ways he did. He challenged the old ways, brought in legal reforms, and he helped spread ideas about nationalism and giving power to the people.
Yep. But it all came at a terrible price. Millions of people dead Europe in chaos. And in the end, the French Revolution was betrayed by the very person who claimed to be its champion.
So what can we learn from Napoleon's downfall? What are the big takeaways beyond the battles and the politics?
I think one of the biggest lessons is about the nature of power. Napoleon's story is a warning about what happens when ambition goes unchecked. He was brilliant and charismatic, but he was also obsessed with power and glory. And that's what destroyed him.
Yeah, it's like that saying, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Exactly. And we also see how easy it is for people in power to lose touch with reality. Napoleon wanted an empire so badly that he stopped caring about the people of France. They were tired of war, tired of sacrifice, and that's what made his downfall possible.
So even the most powerful people need to stay connected to the people they rule. They need to listen to them, understand how their decisions affect their lives.
Absolutely. And one last thing, I think Napoleon's story shows us that history is not set in stone. There were so many points where things could have gone differently.
Right.
If he hadn't attacked Russia, if he hadn't escaped from Elba, who knows what would have happened?
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What if?
It does. And it reminds us that even the biggest events in history are shaped by individual choices, random events, and human flaws and desires.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap things up. Napoleon's story reminds us that power doesn't last forever. Even the most brilliant people can fall. And history is full of surprises.
Yeah, it's been awesome exploring all this with you.
And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the rise and fall of Napoleon Bonaparte. Hopefully you enjoyed this look at one of history's most interesting figures. And remember, history isn't just a bunch of names and dates. It's a story full of drama, intrigue, and lessons that we can still learn from today.